what I want to do is take advantage of the human element of our experiences through academia. A lot of times I think it may seem like some things are very easy for an individual and they may not struggle, but that's just not true. I think rising stars need to know that the struggle is a part of the process, and we all feel the struggle and we have to overcome it. And we're still going through that struggle in one way or another. Welcome back to the B-Xcellent podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Harrison Smith. Today, we have an amazing episode for you. And for a reminder for those who are new, the essence of this podcast has been to spotlight the remarkable individuals within the underrepresented STEM communities and to pass along valuable knowledge to emerging stars within this field, ultimately enhancing their paths to success. We are now in season 2, and in this episode, what I'd like to do is recap some of my top 7 sound bites from season 1. Now, today, we're not here to just merely reflect on these highlights from the past conversations, but also charting a course of what lies ahead. So I'd like to start with my first soundbite, which comes from Dr. Monique McLean. I'd like you to take a listen.
Do you feel like that ever goes away? Do you feel like you get to a point and you're like, I don't have imposter syndrome anymore?
I think I go through phases of it, and probably it's not so surprising. Like when I start a new role, I have it more, but then at some point I'm like, okay, I'm doing all right. I'm making it through. So for me, I think it comes and goes, but it will always be there in some form, I think, at some point.
The reason I want to talk about that is I think so many times we get it gets to these phases and we're like, oh, imposter syndrome should go away now. Mm-hmm. Like I'm in this role now. I'm no longer a PhD student. I'm no longer an undergraduate student. No more imposter syndrome. But imposter syndrome exists always. Yep. I imagine when you become anything new, a new mother, a new father, different stages of your life, you're going to feel somewhat like an imposter. And it's just something to kind of get through and not something to deter you from moving forward in your career.
So in this conversation, we delved into the complex world of imposter syndrome. What stood out to me was her candidness and depth of her vulnerability. She shared that her experience with imposter syndrome isn't a singular event, but a series of events, revealing that it's a recurring challenge rather than a hurdle to be cleared once and for all. This insight not only humanizes the struggle, but also sheds light on the ongoing process and self-acknowledgement of growth. I think what I want to do is take advantage of the human element of our experiences through academia. A lot of times I think it may seem like some things are very easy for an individual and they may not struggle, but that's just not true. I think rising stars need to know that the struggle is a part of the process, and we all feel the struggle and we have to overcome it. And we're still going through that struggle in one way or another. So I think a little bit of transparency is definitely needed when we talk about STEM and what it takes to be excellent. So that was my first soundbite. And again, as I go through all of these sound bites, I really encourage everybody to go back through some of these episodes because there was a lot of information that was packed into all of these episodes. And we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. My second sound bite also comes from Dr. Monique McLean. Take a listen.
So my next question is, how soon should undergrads or people who are interested in this type of research, how soon should they try to actively get involved in it? When would you advise that for them?
Yeah, so I think it's always good to start early. So even if you're a first year student and you don't necessarily get, the opportunity, I wouldn't say you should stop. You should always try because you never know who's open-minded to letting young people in. But definitely, earlier the better, or even just kind of understanding more what they do or learning about your options, I think is important. Or learning how to apply or what opportunities there are. Like, for example, there are programs like SURF, so like it would be good to know early, like, oh, okay, this program exists that pays me to do research at many different institutions, right? So maybe I can work on applying for that next year or something. Or like, now I can maybe volunteer in a lab so to gain experience. So there's lots of different options, but I would definitely say earlier is better in terms of like kind of getting on people's radar and then, coming back,
Yeah. To your point, some people are very open to letting young minds into the lab and some people are not.
True.
So are there any suggestions or strategies you would advise those students to kind of like still get the experience that they might need to get involved in this area?
Yeah, so I would recommend, if possible, trying to join some sort of project-based organization or club, or maybe if you have a hobby you're dedicated to, like working on that, because that shows to me that you have dedication to something, or you want to learn something new and you're developing basic
Or
skills.
building the club yourself.
Or that too, exactly. Right. For example, like I get a lot of students who've been in Purdue-based program because they tend to be interested in rocketry and whatnot. There are other clubs like, I think there's a 3D printing club or a prosthetics club, but you don't have to necessarily be in a club. You know, some students have their own 3D printers and they make their own parts, or maybe there's some other like design project you can make, for example. But that shows me that you're trying to build up skills, or maybe learning how to code. You know, that's always something that could be done early rather than waiting to do that in a lab. And that will kind of build your resume and also give you some experience like when you're starting to join research.
So a key highlight from this discussion was the exploration of the ideal timing for diving into research. This segment stood out as it offered valuable insight for individuals who might be first-year students or those with limited experience. The underlying that the best time to engage in research is early as one situation allows. The emphasis was on the significant role that early research engagement plays in one's development. She outlined effective strategies for initiating this journey, whether it be talking to professors and asking to engage in their research, or starting your own clubs for the type of research that you're interested in. So moving on, I think from this point, I think I want to do a bit of a better job expanding on points like this, providing maybe segments where we kind of go into like great tips that could hopefully unpack your potential for excellence in your future. My next soundbite comes from Dr. Leopold Green. Take a listen.
That's when I started realizing like it's not just DNA nanotechnology that I'm learning about, but it's control theory and the idea that you can, at the macro scale, if you set the temperature of a thermostat, the room stays that temperature within a certain
degrees,
within a couple degrees. That is control theory. And that biology does this naturally, right? So cells are able to detect signals at different concentrations at different times. And if the signal goes above, then it responds in a certain way. And if it's too low, then it responds in a different way.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And the fact that I have now engineered a system using DNA molecules that I can control the same thing. I add a specific DNA input. It tells my DNA strands or my DNA structure to break apart. I add another DNA input and it tells them to grow back together.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm designing a controller, and then I was able to couple that to a synthetic system. So now I'm like, wow, if I can do that with the molecules of life, then what can I do in terms of therapeutics?
Absolutely.
So then that's when I started branching out. Okay, how are these being applied to different therapies? And there's a whole world of that. And then I thought about, okay, I'm interested in the skin, and this is my personal, going back to dermatology.
Yes.
How do I couple these two? And that's when I got into the microbiome.
Okay. In our exploration of innovative research, we touched upon the fascinating intersection of control theory and DNA manipulation. Our guest showed how they applied the principle of control theory to direct the formation and configuration of DNA, revealing the potential for these very DNA structures to elicit therapeutic effects within the body. While we only skimmed the surface of this complex topic, it was enlightening to spotlight such a groundbreaking work in the realm of research. Now, for me, who understands the field, I think it's very impressive what Dr. Leopold Green is doing. But for others who may not understand the field well, I'm not sure that we really dived into the topic as deep as we could have for people to really get an appreciation here. So what I want to do more in the future is to spend more time on the research and not talking about it at a level that it may be difficult for beginners or newcomers to understand, but talk about it at a level that everybody can understand, making it a little bit more accessible. So moving forward, I think creating segments where we talk a bit about people's research on that particular level that it's accessible, I think is going to be very useful to individuals who are interested in getting into STEM careers. Our next soundbite comes from Dr. Luciano Castillo. Take a listen.
This is a tough question, and I think And I wish one day you do a podcast on find somebody extremely successful and talk about their failures. And it's very unfortunately that sometimes when you look at my record and the students see it, they may see that this person is so gifted, so special. But in reality, we all come from the same thing. I mean, like the fears that many students feel, the intimidation, I felt that. Like if you have met Luciano when I was 20, you would not believe it. I'm that person because of the insecurity, the fears that I had, right? Not being good enough. Am I smart enough to do it, right?
Right.
And you would not believe that the failures that I have had over the life is what made me who I am today. So all of these experiences, and we didn't talk about them, they helped me become stronger. You know, when I was telling you about a student that is persistent, I was determined. Once my father showed me that refinery, that I was going to be an engineer no matter what. Okay. And I just don't want to get a degree. I want to learn, deeply learn. So when I look at the whole journey, yes, if I've had programs like the one I'm talking was good, but the one thing I would have done differently, my career as a scientist, I would have loved to do more these social problems leading from social-driven problems to the fundamentals to innovation. Because we do a lot of innovations in my lab, and I would have loved to have done that early on in my career.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But everything else,
Yeah.
no, I don't regret it.
Yeah.
I love what I do because at the end I'm serving society.
It's that wanting to get to where you got to sooner, because like you probably could have tackled even more things.
All right. So I really like this clip because here we're talking about reflecting on failure. Our guest shared a powerful narrative on how navigating through failures has shaped their current self. This acknowledgement of failures as a fundamental part of growth is something often overlooked, which can make the journey into STEM seem daunting for many. However, it's the resilience and the lessons learned from these setbacks that forge excellence. Embracing the overcoming failure not only builds character, but equips one with invaluable skills for success. Again, I think more stories need to be shared that dive into the specific of failures. Here we talk generally about failure and how it's made him who he was. But I think getting people to share their stories of failures and really showing some transparency, again, that their success wasn't because the road was easy, and their success was a story of multiple failures, but also a lot of success more than they failed. So in the future, incorporating more of that element into episodes, I think is going to be very necessary. Our next soundbite also comes from Dr. Luciano Castillo. Take a listen.
I learned, if I would have said that to Luciano when I was very young, 18 a year, just love yourself. Love who you are. And that is hard. When for us minority, when you don't have the same color as everybody, you always feel like I'm good enough. Even when you are a professor, even when you have achieved everything, I'm still good enough. And then I realized later in life, the beauty in our color, the beauty that is when you feel at peace with who you are, that you truly love the person that you have become. All of my decisions, all of them, are still based, if I look back, do I regret what I have done? Like for me, it goes back to the issue. I want to make sure when my life is done, that at least I did something good for the young generation. So that goes back to the point that everything has to have something good for society. But at the same time, I didn't love myself enough at that time. So you have a lot of insecurity. And then you always have to feel that you have to prove stuff.
Yeah.
And I lived my entire career like that.
Right.
Until my 40s.
Right. So you're fighting the world, but then you're also fighting yourself because your self is questioning.
Yeah,
that
you're
too.
proving who you are.
Right.
Imagine that.
Right.
Can you imagine that? Having to prove?
I mean, we live it.
Yes, it's painful.
It is definitely
It's energy
painful.
exhausting. And then as a result of that, you're less creative. As a result of that, you take less risk. So this goes back to the tipping point in my career was when I was moving from Texas to Purdue. Because that's when I started caring what anybody thinks. And then I started thinking really big.
Our guest shared a piece of advice they wish they could have given to their younger self. And this advice, I think, while underrated, is very important. It's love and embrace your true self. Throughout our journeys, it's common to encounter feelings of inadequacy. Yet it is through self-love that we discover our greatest strength. This message, though simple, is profound and impactful and often overlooked in the pursuit of excellence. I encourage everyone to practice self-love and recognize your unique beauty within yourself. You might find that this self-appreciation unlocks a greater strength within you. And that strength is going to be what's needed to overcome some of the challenges within the STEM field itself. All right. You do not do yourself any favors by doubting yourself or picking yourself apart and just only looking at how inadequate you are. You will have a harder time succeeding when you take a look at yourself from that type of lens. So again, I want to make sure we are explaining the human elements here when it comes to overcoming certain aspects of the STEM journey. Our next soundbite comes from Dr. Brandon Pitts. Take a listen.
So I think my first piece of advice for people is to be comfortable asking questions when they feel that they're stuck. And that could even include asking for help. There have been many times where I've had to rely on mentors because I felt stuck somehow and I just couldn't get it figured out. And I had to go to somebody who was either older than me, wiser than me, who had been in, who is in a place where I'm trying to get to. And I just had to sit down and say, hey, how do I work this out? And you'd be surprised, more than 50% of people, significantly more than 50% of people would actually sit down with you and give you the answers that you're seeking. I think there's something innate about all of us that's wanting to kind of reach back and make sure that we're helping, pull people up.
Absolutely.
I think that's the biggest piece. It's been people. And so I think I've wrapped up a lot of different pieces in there, but it's been the curiosity that's led me to ask questions to be able to get the things that I want to get done.
Absolutely. And not being afraid to ask questions. I think that's why we're pushing asking questions. I'll push back a little bit. You gotta think about your questions sometimes.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Because you've ever been to class, you ever said something to us, to the whole class, and then someone 10 minutes later asks you a question about something that you already spoke on, and you're like, you weren't listening.
Yeah, okay. That's very fair. Okay. I totally agree.
But to most students, there's a lot more. I think there was a lot more students out there that are afraid to ask anything than there are students that are just asking questions just to ask questions.
Absolutely.
So therefore, I'm in total agreement with you. Ask questions and be curious,
Be curious.
And to be honest, this education and your knowledge that you're obtaining, it's not about them. It's about you.
Absolutely.
So if they got to get frustrated and be upset that they got to answer this question to you, then at least you are one question more knowledgeable than you were a minute ago.
In this soundbite, our guest emphasizes the importance of feeling comfortable enough to ask questions, a practice that undervalued yet critical for achieving peak success. Contrary to common belief that questioning signifies weakness, it actually enhances personal growth. All right. The more you ask questions, the more you learn, the more knowledgeable you become. By refraining from asking questions, you limit your own potential. You'd be amazed how many people are out there ready and eager to answer your questions. Therefore, embrace the curiosity, ask more questions, and move one step closer to excellence. Again, I think a lot of our guests had a lot of tips to give our students. And I think, again, each of these episodes so packed with so much information. I think we need to do a better job, or I need to do a better job of packaging some of these tips into more digestible bites so that listeners have a better time engaging in the information. Our next and final tip, soundbite, comes from our PhD graduate student here, Tanya Pereira. Take a listen.
when I was presenting this work once within the lab meeting, and even my committee members were there, the member that I'm talking about, Dr. Maisa Khatib, she is from Arizona State University, and she asked me this question that, what do you as a female in the team, because I was the only female on that team, bring to your research, and how do you think of this mask as a product, could be applied to females in a differently as compared to males? Do you think there is a way, or there could be some issues that can happen for a female that would not probably exist for a male, and vice versa? Maybe they exist for a male and they don't exist for a female. And my answer was like, of that unaware engineer who always has thought of the world of engineering in terms of mathematics and physics. It's like, no, I am an engineer just like my counterparts, so we're all equals, and the product is a mask. Everybody will use it the same way. Its breathability is better. And that's where I was pointed out for the first time that it applies differently. And that's where she pointed out to me about, for example, just an example, that females have different hormonal phases because of which their breathing cycles also differ during those phases. And if I am taking a standard value at, I have gotten so much better, say X percentage better with my breathability of the mask, I am not actually saying that for an average female. I'm actually saying that for an average male. Mm-hmm. Along with that, skin issues and size of the mask,
or
the fitting.
Makeup. I remember that was a big deal too.
Makeup was a big deal. So these are some of the issues which she was expecting that me as a female would bring to the table in the team. But we have been trained as such in this entire world of engineering and STEM that we do not look at our research through a gender lens, or we do not think of the social implications of the problems that are existing. We think of technology, we are capable of doing those things very efficiently, but we somehow, in that pipeline of doing our research and sending it to become a product in the industry, we actually keep on increasing the biases that exist, especially the social biases.
This discussion sheds light on the presence of bias in STEM practices with a particular focus on gender bias. Highlighting this issue was crucial as it paves the way for the development of technology that are going to be more inclusive. It also underscores the urgent need, I believe, for greater inclusivity within the STEM fields themselves. By bringing a diverse range of perspectives into STEM, we better position ourselves to create solutions that benefit everyone. Moving forward, I'd like to create more episodes where we're shedding more light on bias within STEM fields and start more conversations on how to address these biases. By addressing biases, I think we only make the field of STEM stronger, all right? This is not necessarily to beat down institutions or beat down scientists or engineers who do not do a greater job to address bias, because some of that is just, some people just don't know what they don't know. I've had different conversations with a lot of different engineers, and it's not always clear that there's bias being introduced when they create certain technologies. And I think it's by having those diverse perspectives, people to give their perspective or give their insight on the use of this technology, that can really help blossom more technologies that are more inclusive, and it just has everyone in consideration there. So with that is the end of my 7 sound bites that I liked from season 1. And, as I reflected on season 1, I realized the importance of distilling our conversations into more digestible segments. Again, as I stated before, there was such a wealth of knowledge shared from those episodes. And I believe that we can unlock even greater value by breaking some of these things down as I move through season 2. And so some of those ways of breaking that down would be, I'm going to include a different format. So we're going to take season 1 and we're going to include mini series inside the podcast space. And these mini series include my B-Xcellent tips. Here, I will go segment an episode where I'm offering practical advice for particular things that I think I've learned across my journey or shared with me by a multitude of people, and strategies that people could apply to their everyday life. Next is just again, still focusing what we did in season 1, but we're going to call it B-Xcellent Stars. All right. This is going to be fully just featured on the focus just on the interview itself, highlighting the achievements of that individual and just talking about their journey in general through STEM. And the next part is going to be B-Xcellent STEM Talks. As I stated before, we kind of did that within the first season where we talked about each person's individual research. However, we didn't really dive deep into that research. And when we did talk about that research, we talked about it at a level I think that was not accessible to everyone. So therefore, we're going to try to take a step back and really take a focus within their research and unpack like the fundamentals of what they do so that we can also understand how impressive it is what they're doing and how it's ultimately going to impact our community. So hopefully with this new structure, we deliver more targeted content, thereby enhancing your journey towards excellence. So join us in season 2 as we continue to explore, learn, and grow together. In the meantime, share with me your favorite sound bites and let me know what you would like me to do more of or what you would like to hear more about. Until next time, be excellent.